But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
What is up, party people, and also any NPCs out there, and welcome to HBR News number 186. New Title IX proposals trigger Blizzard, and selfies save lives. Also, happy belated Men's Day for any of you who didn't know. That was yesterday, right? I am your host, Brian Martinez, and I'm here with my panelists to look at the best feels, funnies, and what the fucks to discuss Slam Bam, or Clam Slam, Badger style. Let's get started, shall we? So today's panel consists of, it's just the three of us, Mike J, Hannah Wallen, and me, the Doge in charge. Mike, Dr. Ranamercam, is not available. His sleep schedule is all jacked, and I think he needs to try to become regular again. So he is not going to be able to make today's show, and yeah, he sucks, and we hope he dies in a fire. No, not really, but but he will be missed until next time. So
I can sympathize. Having your sleep schedule jacked really sucks.
Yeah, no, I know. And because of where he is, he's on that UK time. It's really late where he's at. So he wouldn't be much use to us right now if he's really tired, because he'd probably just fall asleep on the stream. And that doesn't really, do anything for us. So, but so it's just the three of us. But this is still going to be a good show. Don't worry, guys. We have a great one lined up. So please consider continuing the conversation both in the live chat, which I'm looking at, and in the comments section. Also, if you're looking at this show from our main channel, Honey Badger Radio, please go over to Badger Live Streams and subscribe there, because that's where the chat is at. That's where the party is at. You can also subscribe to us and follow us on Twitch at Honey Badger Radio as well. And I think we're on live stream and other places that I'm not sure anyone goes to, and Facebook. We're not streaming today because I don't know if you guys noticed, but Facebook's been acting weird. I wasn't able to actually set up the stream for Facebook because it wasn't loading. So I don't know what's going on there, but I hope that, well, whatever it is, that it gets rectified relatively soon. Maybe Facebook will finally die. Maybe Elon Musk bought it and then shot it out of a cannon. Maybe that's why we're having trouble. I don't know.
I don't think we're going to be that lucky.
Okay, so on this week's HBR News Show, we're going to be talking about a man who was saved from jail because of a selfie. Yeah, I know, it's true. The latest in Title IX news, the Oxford Word of 2018, and more. So please stick around. It's going to be a good time. Also join us afterwards for the patron-only after show. So Red Dead Redemption 2, that's been in the news lately, that game from Rockstar. It's been no stranger to let's call it controversy. Since its release, a streamer was temporarily removed from YouTube, which you might know about, because he assaulted a feminist in the game, and apparently that's not okay. You can kill men, you can kill women, you can kill animals, step on puppies, whatever. Just don't kill a feminist. That's in a game, a fictional feminist in a game, because that's going to get you pulled. And then, of course, the articles from supposed game journalists have written on the subject, both of the game itself and also, the events surrounding this attack on the suffragette. I've also been playing Red Dead Redemption 2, and I haven't gotten very far, but I really like it so far. I love the first one. And so, I've been having a good time. So because I've been taking some interest in it, I thought that this would be an interesting article, which is entitled Red Dead Redemption 2 Shows Gaming's Problem with Violence Towards Women. And it goes into much deeper, I guess it gets woker than just punching a feminist. It gets really involved with other stuff. So we're going to find out exactly what the this habanero pepper take from one Jessamy, that's his name, her name, their name, Jessamy Henriksen, and Marika Gugisberg. What in the world is with these names? They're gonna enlighten us on the larger issue, the thing that's bigger than just a game on the on consoles right now. So we're going to find out what they have to say. So if you want to participate in this discussion, either in the after shows, sort of like the way you're watching us, right now, or as a participant in the actual discussion, please consider becoming a patron at www.patreon.com/HoneyBadgerRadio. And if you don't want to wake up one morning to find yourself unable to find the content because YouTube finally dropped the axe on our channels, go to badgerfeed.com. That's badgerfeed.com. That's where basically all of the content that we make in all of its forms can be found. So it should be really easy for you guys to locate there. So without further ado, I guess we're going to go ahead and get into the stories. So I think this one is for Mike. I just got to find where are we at? Yeah, Mike J. Yeah, we're going to talk about the guy who was saved by a selfie. So if you could.
Right, we are, Brian. So, Christopher Procopia, age 21, had a bright future. He worked at a local lumber yard in his home state of Texas and had planned on joining the Army. Until one day on his way to work, he was arrested by Temple County Police Department. But what was he being charged with? An ex-girlfriend from years ago alleged he broke into her house, assaulted her, and then used a box cutter to carve an X into her chest.
Look at that. You see it? That I want to advise anyone with heart conditions or anyone that has children present, please hide them, because this is a very gory scene, and we wouldn't want anyone to have, to deal with something that is so adult. Like this is like R-rated shit right now. I'm sorry, Mike. Go ahead. I had to warn people. We should have given them the heads up, because this gets really gory.
Now, wait a minute. If you use a box cutter on somebody and that is what you come up with, you really suck at using a box cutter. Like, I've seen accidental box cutter injuries that are worse than that.
Well, we'll get into that.
I've seen accidental box cutter injuries that are worse than that from the safety box cutters that have the little plastic thingy over the blade that you really have to screw up to hurt yourself with one of those.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That looks like she did it with a straight pin.
I mean, it's just the raw strength of this guy. He was able to hold her down so perfectly and neatly carve such a dainty little X in there. It speaks to how much of a monster this man is. So,
if you're gonna fake an injury, that's yeah.
Are you saying she faked the injury, Hannah? Wait, don't go around victim. Oh my God. Hashtag believe women. Okay, go ahead, Mike.
Anyway, when Christopher asked what this was all about, the police officer reportedly responded, quote, this is a paraphrase, just to make that clear, "Don't act like you don't know what we're talking about."
Man strength. Go on.
They always do that.
Yeah.
Things weren't looking good for Christopher. The charges he faced carried a maximum sentence of 99 years. Let me just repeat that again if anyone wasn't really listening. 99 years.
Why would they stop at 99? Who thought that was, we'll make it 99 years? It sounds like a curse, like a magical curse.
I'm assuming this is like everything added up, because there was 4 or 5 charges, and that's kind of what they do. They overcharge you. They make this really scary sounding number, and I think if the worst had come to pass, I bet half of these would have been thrown out, but luckily it didn't. Anyway, so maximum sentence of 99 years, but as it turns out, he had an ironclad alibi. While the Procopia family, Christopher included, were attending an event at the Renaissance Hotel in Austin, Christopher's mother, Erin, had taken a photo of them all at 7:02 p.m. on September the 20th, 2007. Meanwhile, Christopher's ex claims that she was attacked by him at 7:20 p.m. on the same day, while he was over 60 miles away from her. Cell phone towers in the area also back up this story. One would expect this would result in an immediate and swift end to the ordeal, but this was not the case. It would take over 9 months for the prosecutor to drop all charges. During that time, Christopher and his parents would spend over $250,000 in bail and lawyers' fees, and Christopher's application to the Army would be denied. Meanwhile, despite overwhelming evidence that his girlfriend fabricated these claims against him, she has yet to be charged with any crime, although the Procopia family does plan on suing.
Jesus. All right. Thoughts, Hannah?
Oh boy.
Thoughts, okay. Other than the thought that's in this story.
God, this pisses me off so bad. This is gonna just keep happening until enough people sort of en masse contact their legislators and demand that the laws be changed. This is like, and this is in the United States, this is in Canada, this is in the UK, this is in India, this is in like just about any nation that has been influenced by English common law and by the laws in the United States. Even the United Nations uses the same standards when they deal with like research and investigation into intimate partner and sexual violence. Mm-hmm. And it's all based on the Duluth model, that one of the creators of the Duluth model has actually come out and said, we were just, spitballing the whole time. We didn't really know what we were doing. We just made stuff up as we went along based on our own belief system, based on our own ideology, and tried to force the perpetrators and the victims to fit our ideology for our research, and then told everybody this is the way things are. And they've admitted that. And the state everywhere is still basing domestic violence law, intimate partner and sexual violence law on this standard. And what they end up doing then is they use it's mostly pressure rather than mandates, but it's really mandates through that kind of pressure, like funding pressure, investigative pressure, like your local police department can be investigated in some areas if they don't prosecute enough men, or if they prosecute too many women in domestic violence type disputes, in intimate partner sexual violence disputes. So if they have somebody even who demonstrably perjures herself in court, even who has demonstrably filed a false charge, who has demonstrably lied repeatedly to police during an investigation, police often have their hands tied in terms of and prosecutors often have their hands tied in terms of repercussions against these women who are exploiting the system like this. And this kind of I just had just laid into somebody basically on Twitter for saying that false accusations do not ruin lives, and people who have been falsely accused don't experience PTSD. I have friends who have been falsely accused who have PTSD from the ordeals. Mm-hmm. And absolutely, for this to continue to happen over and over again. I mean, what happened to Mark Pearson? What happened to my friend in the 7 years in hell case? And the one case I couldn't document that basically went on for almost 20 years, and is. Like, the guy ended up having to leave the county, leave all of his friends and his family, everyone, to get away from his stalker who was using false accusations to hurt him. This has to stop. And then we have to push for laws to mandate prosecution when an accuser is proved during the course of investigating or prosecuting the accusation. When the accuser is proved to have filed a false complaint with the police resulting in charges, to have lied to police during an investigation in order to support specifically a false accusation, or to have perjured herself in court. Like, it's one thing for her to lie and say, well, no, I wasn't high because I didn't want you to know I was using drugs. It's another thing to say this happened in this location at this time, and he's somewhere else, or this person forced me to do this at gunpoint and video shows that she did it voluntarily and there was no gun. You know, those things need to result in prosecution, and there needs to be heavy penalties. It can't just be simple, like you go to jail for 18 months on perjury a lot of times. This needs to be years.
99 years?
I'll tell you what, there's a lot of people arguing in favor of if you file a false complaint, and it's proved that you knew you were filing a false complaint.
You should suffer the same penalty or something like that you would have put on the other person. Yeah.
Yeah, you should be up for the same penalty that would be applicable had that person been found guilty. I'm starting to agree with that because this is happening a lot.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I want to go that far on it, but I do agree that something needs to be done. We need something in place for that. I don't know what we would call it or what.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that, like, it doesn't look like anything's going to happen to this woman.
It said specifically in the article, it's like, well, we're not going to release her name because she hasn't been charged with anything. And at this point, it doesn't look like she's going to be charged.
And, like, what? The family's going to sue? Yeah, but what's that going to accomplish? Like,
I don't think lost get $250,000 out of her.
No, that's what I'm saying. They lost $250,000. That's probably something they didn't have either. And so, you know, I mean, this is, I mean, the guy was spared jail, and that's good. But holy shit, like, it's not much better.
You can buy a 3-bedroom house in a moderately decent neighborhood in the Dayton metro area for under $80,000. Okay. Because I've been looking at the housing market, so I know right now for under $80,000, there's this 3 times you could buy 3 houses. You could raise a child from birth to adulthood. You could put somebody through college on that much money. You could put somebody through a hell of a good college on that money. It's insane to cost somebody that kind of money and not face prosecution for filing a false complaint with police is actually illegal. Lying to the police during an investigation is illegal. Perjury is illegal. These are 3 laws broken.
Yep.
Well, you see, there was a really nasty breakup they had in high school, and that makes it okay. That was actually her stated reason. Like,
my God,
he didn't treat me right during the relationship, and
I wonder why.
When we broke up, he made me feel really bad. So it's cool that I did this.
You know, actually, the other thing that should happen to false accusers, if it cost him that much money, that means he had to spend that much money on attorney fees and everything that whole time, and probably some travel.
Yep.
And research, legal research. Then how much money did it cost the state?
Yeah.
Every penny of that comes out of, if you live in that area, every penny comes out of your pocket. You paid for that. That's another one. Every guy listening here, every time there is a false accusation made in your area, every time somebody walks into a police department, files a false complaint, every time somebody walks into a clerk of court and gets a frivolous temporary emergency restraining order, every time somebody exploits the system like that, they are stealing money out of your pocket.
It's true. And mostly men pay the taxes. So it's mostly men paying the cost of false accusations against men. The ones that go into the legal system and the police system and all of that. So that's all true.
The other thing that I wanted to bring up is I had a little bit of a interesting thought about this one. You know, normally I'm sympathetic to MGTOWs. I mean, I always view it as a little bit extreme, but I get it. I understand it. And then I look at something like this and realize, like, MGTOW wouldn't have protected you from this. Because this was something that he did in high school, so several years ago. Like, let's say, yeah, okay, you were a kid, you played the dating game, you did all that, then you wised up, you got red pilled, you became MGTOW, and that's, you know, hey, that's where you're going to be on from here on out. But then a crazy woman that you dated in the past decides to slash herself up with a box cutter and blame you for it, there's no protection against that.
Well, MGTOW's not a guarantee. It's just like you know, from now on. So you are going into it hoping that no ghost from your past will come up and try to fuck you over.
Well, or no woman will find your profile on Facebook and be like, "Oh, you know, this guy would make a convenient foil for my story."
And even MGTOW's. Go ahead, man.
There's more than one story of men who have faced false rape allegations by women who just decided to pick them out of Facebook and accuse them. And then there's women who have also picked guys off of Facebook and said, "Yeah, that's the dad. That's the father of my child. Go after him for child support." And there have been men that have been forced to pay.
What was that one case where it was like, "Oh, well, he looked like the guy that raped me in my dream," or something like that?
Yeah, there was the girl that accused a guy. And, you know, there's been situations where women have... they basically, you know, go into the police department and you know, pick a guy that they are interested in that hasn't showed any interest in them. And, "Oh yeah, he did this to me." There's been at least one case in India with a celebrity, a television celebrity or movie celebrity. It's been a while since I read it, where the woman just absolutely stalked him for years, and it was a combination of her sending him abusive messages and slandering him to everybody else around them that he was doing this to her. And she almost got him in really serious shit because of her accusations. And it all turned out that she was stalking him. And the vexatious litigant from the 7 Years in Hell story, she stalked her victim. She didn't just make accusations against him either. They would find empty packs of the brand of cigarettes that she smoked, which was not a mainstream brand. It wasn't like, you know, Marlboros or something, of this specific brand and flavor of cigarettes that she smoked on their front doorstep, you know, around the side of their house. They like, it's these women, when they get like the psychotic type that makes these types of accusations, they're really crazy as shit. And being MGTOW doesn't save you from them.
No, it doesn't. And you know, because MGTOW are being, you know, there was a hit piece that was made recently, I think for CNN on MGTOW. Even like actually joining MGTOW or identifying as part of that group probably makes you a target. Like, granted, they're just doing like slam pieces in the press, but you've seen articles written about, you know, the one time I dated a Gamergate supporter, or the one time I went on a blind date with a men's rights activist, and it turns into this story of an attempted, you know, rape or something. I mean, like, they've been using the rape threat narrative to try to destroy people they don't like. So if it's learned that you're a MGTOW, and then the idea of the sort of let's say the miasma surrounding MGTOW is overwhelmingly negative, a woman that learns that you are one could make an accusation and try to destroy you with it. I mean, why wouldn't she? If she doesn't like you because you're MGTOW, right? And she doesn't even have to know you to do it, because it's happened. Yeah. People who've never met you made accusations, or met other people have made accusations about them. And you know, it gets even if the charges are inevitably like, or sort of eventually dropped, it ends up costing us so much money to go through the process, because we have this, you know, I don't know, believe women thing where we have to take the claim seriously enough to go through it, that it ends up costing us a bunch of money anyway. One other thing I wanted to say is that if this guy had gotten 99 years, he would not have, like, I know this is just a worst case scenario, but he wouldn't have survived. 99 years is basically a death sentence, right? So
might as well give him a million infinity plus one.
Yeah, you may as well just be like, that's why I laughed. I scoff at the idea of getting 99 years when most of us don't live to be 99, right? So it's like, okay, so basically you're saying, you know, he's like, it's a death sentence, basically. And even if it's only like 50 or 60 years, like if you if it's not 99, you're still not going to be, you're going to come out and you're not going to be useful to anyone. So not much anyways, because you've been inside the whole time. So
it's basically a life sentence. In fact,
yeah.
a man's average lifespan is still like what, 74, 75 years?
Mm-hmm.
So it's longer than the average lifespan, and it's longer than most people live, even if they come from a family that ages well and lives long.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's essentially, it would be a life sentence.
Yeah, exactly. And then like you know, if that being the case, then what she tried to do was kill a man with the system.
Yeah,
I mean, that's what would have happened, right?
You know what happens. Like, feminists talk about this fictional rape culture we live in, right? Where a rape culture is defined as an environment of tolerance for rape, and where rape is prevalent and pervasive and all that. And yet, not only does our society reject a person completely if they have been convicted of rape, but once he gets into jail, other criminals will also reject him completely, violently. Anybody that's in there for anything that isn't a sex crime will kick the shit out of him every chance they get.
Mm-hmm.
So this guy, the chances of your surviving in prison if you are convicted of a sex crime are low. I can't imagine that they're as... granted, I know that there's a lot of men in there that have to know how unfair the system is at this point, but I can't imagine that there's a lot of men in there that are so dramatically different from other men that they are less likely to knee-jerk react when their protective instincts toward women are triggered. And just hearing that somebody has done something like that, it seems to be very triggering for pretty much as a gender, men in general. Even men who have no other interest in women get very protective when they think a woman has been assaulted. In fact, I made a dumb joke to one of my managers once after I had an allergic reaction that caused my face to blow up, and it looked like I'd been in a fight. And he asked me when I came in to tell them why I couldn't serve food that day, because nobody was going to want to buy food from somebody that looked like that. It looked like I was a plague victim, red, splotchy, swollen, everything, right? And I just joked. I was just being a dipshit, and I said I didn't get dinner to the table on time. And like, this guy, I'm bigger than this guy, and he instantly puffs up. What? Like he was the gayest gay man. And he was always very level-headed, very even-tempered, everything, until I said that it was just a joke, right? My husband would never, ever lay a hand on me like that. And it's a good thing, too, because I've seen him bend steel with his bare hands, literally, for real. But in any case, this guy was, and my husband was behind me, too. And this guy was smaller than me. My husband's a pretty big guy. And he was going to go after him. I was like, I was joking, and that was how I learned that you don't joke about that to White Knight. But yeah, this is like guys that have no other interest in women at all, even, will be that protective. So you end up in prison with guys who maybe have more of a hair trigger on their tempers. Some guys are in there for that reason. Because they've committed crimes for that reason. Yeah. And guys that are accustomed to being in violent environments and stuff, and the guards say, oh, by the way, this guy's in here for raping a girl and cutting her with a box cutter. He's dead meat.
Mm-hmm. Right. Any other thoughts on this story? One other thing too is that but speaking about the prison thing, if this guy had gone to jail, he may not have even lasted 99. Probably not even 50 years, because there's a lot of white knights in prison too. Like, if you if you're a rapist or you like a wife beater or something, and you go to prison, you're not going to be very popular with the inmates. Just saying. So it's not good either way. All right, so we got some super chats. It's a good thing that he didn't go to prison. That's what I'm saying. Albert Nada gives us $5 Canadian and says, just wanted to ask everyone to follow Toronto DJ Joanne Wilder on Facebook and Twitter. She gave awesome love to the men on International Men's Day. Well, that's great. I did follow her. I saw your comment from earlier, and I went to her page and followed her on Twitter and Facebook. So, and I'll probably reach out to her at some point and see if she'd like to come on the show or something. Sierra de Flora gives us $2 and says, another piece in the Believe the Evidence file. Yep. So, yeah, more Believe Women nonsense is on the... That's where it gets us. That's where it gets us. Okay, so let's move on to the next story. This is the big one. I know that might surprise you, but this is actually the bigger story. New Title IX proposed regulations, ACLU to not support the new rules for due process. Education Secretary Betsy DeVos's Education Department has released guidelines for a public response period. A few months ago, there was a leaked version that was reported on, and not too much has changed since then. There are many good things that are included in the rules proposal, while there are some areas that could use some improvement. All right, so here's some stuff in the proposal. Schools must provide a live hearing. This does away with the provision where schools could use a single investigator model where the allegation would be adjudicated with various meetings between the complainant and the respondent. Okay? We could comment on each one briefly instead of me reading through the whole thing, because that might then you don't have to try to remember what was that one thing from before. So there's that.
That'd probably be a good idea.
Yeah. So that's the first one. So what do you think about that? I think that's good, right?
Yeah, live hearing is important because among other things, the reason that you have the right to a jury trial and you have the right to face your accuser in court in front of that jury is when and the reason that they wouldn't let any testimony happen in our case over internet connection or through phones is because it makes a difference when the individuals judging the case, guilt or innocence, responsible or not responsible, can see the overt behavior of the individuals involved while they're testifying. How do their facial expressions change? What's their body language? How do they act around each other and stuff like that? And the other thing is, there's two different things here. You have the single investigator model has the person investigating actually also judge the case, and in a live hearing, they would have to have potentially the person investigating be a separate individual from the people judging the case. Usually, when colleges do a tribunal or something, there's professors and students involved, and there's usually, 3 or more people involved. It's usually an odd number so that they don't have a tie where they have to have, somebody come in and make a decision. And that would make a big difference in biases making the decision of the case versus people actually having to look at the evidence and the behavior of the people involved.
And also, there's another part to this. Cross-examinations are going to be allowed. However, the advisor for the parties would be the ones to ask questions. The parties may be questioned from separate rooms as long as every party can simultaneously see and hear any testimony.
So, in other words, it'd be like with your lawyer in court. Except, of course, in court, you're all in the same room. Although, the UK did do that thing with Mark Pearson's case where his accuser was behind a curtain and you couldn't see anything of her but her hand. But yeah, it's again being able to see how the parties act when they're questioned and how they interact, and being able to see each other and everything that makes a big difference.
Yeah, for sure. Also, Next, universities must now give students any information that they need to defend themselves, including written notice of alleged wrongdoing and opportunities to review any evidence, including exculpatory evidence. Many universities have hid exculpatory evidence from respondents.
See, that last bit, that's actually the fact that universities have hidden exculpatory evidence from respondents is just mind-blowing.
Mm-hmm.
And it really tells you what's going on in academia right now, because Title IX and the Dear Colleague guidance didn't say that you have to find a certain number of young men guilty. It didn't say that you have to have a majority of cases where the young men are found guilty. And it didn't say that you have to violate somebody's rights to find them guilty. So this is kind of like it, as much as it said that you had to go through go by the preponderance of evidence process and all of that. Hiding exculpatory evidence is, no matter what measure you're using, it's below and beyond or above and beyond what they can say the state forced them to do. That's ideological.
Mm-hmm. Also, in a previous study, FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, has found that many universities do not explicitly presume innocence of the respondent. Oh, you don't say. The new proposal would include presumption of innocence, as well as instructions that officials involved in an investigation must not have any biases or conflicts of interest. I'm not really sure how you would control for that, though. But there is that.
Well, this is kind of difficult, but you can control for that in a way. You can say, the gender studies professors cannot be involved in this. And this is something else. A lot of schools apparently relegated this type of investigation specifically to the gender studies or interdisciplinary studies department. And if you have, say, maybe the individual involved isn't a professor, or maybe the individual involved, if you have to have people involved in this that are professors, pick somebody from the calculus department, like from the math department that teaches calculus, or pick a physics professor, somebody that is used to going based on logic and evidence and instead of biases or things like that. And then the other thing is, if they can avoid professors that have one of the students or both of the students in their class, if they can avoid, involving somebody that's related to the student, there's ways to control for biases.
Yeah, I mean there are, but then I think about just like the general bias of most colleges where it swings, and I think that it's still going to be a problem. On top of that, I mean, like I'm hearing all these proposals, and I guess I'm speaking to something larger, but I'll come back to that. I still don't know why colleges are involved in this shit anyways, and why we're not just going to the cops, but whatever. Next is the definition of harassment, I like this, has been narrowly defined. Previously, under the 2011 guidance, it was defined as, quote, any unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature. That's right, I'll say it again. Harassment was defined before, at least for the purposes of colleges, universities, as, quote, any unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature. Okay? The new proposal defines harassment as, quote, unwelcome conduct on the basis of sex that is so severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive. So it had to be objectively offensive. I'm not really sure how that's going to work. That it effectively denies a person equal access to the recipient's education program or activity. So they have a more specific definition, although I think it's still a bit hairy. Okay, so Hannah, I don't know if you wanted to give a comment on that.
Well, regarding harassment, obviously they're talking specifically about sexual harassment there, because you can engage in harassment that is not sexual. In fact, I consider pursuing a false accusation against an individual to be a form of harassment, especially considering the fact that it's a long-term ordeal for most people that experience it. But as far as objectively offensive, that's probably going to be the sticking point. But objectively means that it has to be something that other people would recognize. Basically, something that would be reasonably expected. Like this is right out of the Violence Against Women Act defines harassment and stalking. It has to be, among other things, something that is a course of action, so a sustained course of action, not one action, but that would be reasonably expected to cause substantial emotional distress, or if there is evidence that has caused substantial emotional distress. So if somebody does something to another student that is openly causing substantial emotional distress, that's unwelcome, that they've been let know it's unwelcome, that nobody is going to question, why the student didn't want to put up with that, or that the normal people basically won't question why the student didn't want to put up with that, then they're going to be subject to this.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why I still think this is pretty, it gets pretty hairy. And the other thing is, there was something else. Unwelcome conduct on the basis of sex that is so severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive that it effectively denies a person equal access to the recipient's education, program, or activity.
Yeah.
No, that
limits it too.
Yeah. Yeah, it does.
It,
it's an additional control. It has to limit your access, right?
Right. You can have substantial emotional distress from something and still go on with your life. Trust me, I've experienced that. And I've gone to school with somebody who, I've had bullies of both sexes, and I've gone to school with somebody who pulled some really shitty stuff on me. There was a girl in the class behind mine when I was in high school that actually, at one point, she orchestrated a conflict between me and a guy that led to us coming to blows in the hallway, which ended up getting his ass kicked by more than one person because he hit a girl, and he did hit first, and I did hit harder because he didn't really want to hit me. He was holding back. If he had, he would have knocked me on my ass. But in any case, this girl kept this up for over a year, doing stuff like this. And when I say orchestrated, I mean she went back and forth with notes and lockers and everything. It was like she had to be thinking, oh, this is so cloak and dagger when she was doing it. And that was harassment. If that took place at a university, something like that took place at a university, it would be harassment. But it wouldn't have resulted. It didn't result in my losing access to my schooling then, and it wouldn't result in my losing access to a university. It would have to be so bad that it would interfere with your ability to study, or it would interfere with your ability to pay in class, or pay attention in class, or it would interfere with your ability to attend, because you would be afraid to go there, or it would just be so distressful for you to be there. In fact, making a false accusation would qualify in my book, because a student who's facing a false accusation ends up being heckled by other students, ends up being discriminated against by professors, ends up afraid that more accusations are going to follow if they're in the environment where the accusation was made. So yeah, there are situations where it could, but most types of really annoying behavior, even really pervasive, objectively offensive behavior, aren't necessarily going to keep you from accessing your education. They're just annoying, really annoying.
Yeah, I apologize. My dog's barking at people on the street. So next, any Title IX violation must be reported by by any official with authority to take corrective action in order for a school to be responsible for having known about an incident. Incidents must also have taken place within the school's own program or activity. One negative part of the proposal allows both complainants and respondents to appeal a ruling. In the U.S. judicial system, the prosecution cannot appeal a decision. Only a defendant can. In this case, respondents would be able to subject respondents to a kind of double jeopardy. Some recent lawsuits have involved shortcomings of how schools have handled appeals by respondents. So that's basically the list of proposed changes, or at least the ones that Andrew, the person who put this together, thank you, Andrew, found stood out for him. So, and I agree.
That last one.
Yeah, go ahead.
They're treating this like a civil case rather than a criminal case because it's not in the criminal justice system; it's in the university system. They're still making the mistake of treating university disciplinary systems like court systems. And honestly, this is when the state should keep its nose out of entirely. And honestly, the only time the state should get involved is if the students sue and it's provable that one of them was essentially denied the reasonable expectation of the provision of an education that they paid for on false basis.
Mm-hmm.
But the state should be staying out of this. But if the state's going to be involved, everything except treating it like a civil case that's on this list is reasonable. And if they're going to apply penalties that are as severe as get applied during a criminal case, and having your education, having your career trajectory completely wrecked before you even really get to start it, that's pretty severe. It's not jail, but it's still pretty severe.
Yeah.
It does some of the same things that going to jail will do to you. That's Brian Banks. His career was destroyed by spending a 5-year stint in jail. And in this instance, the student is now going to have all of this debt and nothing for it. And their ability to actually pursue the career they wanted to is wrecked. They're not going to get another chance to get that back. So I would think this should be subject to the same stipulations as the criminal justice system. The accused should have an appeal, but the accuser should not.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on with the rest of this. On the whole, these rules are significantly better than the 2011 Obama-era guidance that have plagued students accused of sexual misconduct. Unlike the Obama administration, the Trump Education Department is following proper procedure when writing these rules. In response to the new proposed rules, the ACLU, in typical ACLU fashion, issued a series of tweets saying that these new rules tip the scales too far against those making complaints. Oh, they do that.
Tweets.
Tweets, yes. Tweets.
Anything but tweets.
I know.
Jesus Christ.
The ACL's tweeted.
Basing the ACLU, like the American Civil Liberties Union, just said due process is an attack on accusers. They just basically said basing the findings in a hearing on an accusation where the accused is going to face stiff penalties if found guilty is an attack on accusers. That evidence is an unfair standard.
Yep.
That actually proving the case, having to prove the case, is an unfair standard to subject sexual assault accusers to.
That's right.
That's absolutely insane. Do you know why we have different standards for evidence in different types of cases? We have the preponderance of evidence standard. We have beyond a reasonable doubt, and so on. Is because in serious cases, where serious penalties are at stake, our forefathers decided the more serious the penalty, the more sure you should be that you are getting it right before you apply that penalty. And so the worse the crime and the worse penalties are subjected, the guilty are subjected to, the higher the standard for evidence, the standard for proof before they apply those penalties, before they find somebody guilty. It's insane for the ACLU to make a statement like that.
Oh, but
they're
do you
not
want
the
to
ACLU anymore?
No.
Make a statement like that.
Do you want to hear what they specifically said? So here's what they said on. Now these are tweets, so I don't know, but this is the ACLU nonetheless. So I wouldn't take this lightly just because it's on Twitter. All right, we advocate for fair school disciplinary processes that uphold the rights of both parties in campus sexual assault and harassment cases. Today, Secretary DeVos proposed a rule that would tip the scales against those who would raise their voices. We strongly oppose it. The proposed rule would make schools less safe for survivors of sexual assault and harassment when there is already alarmingly high rates of campus sexual assaults and harassment that go unreported. How the fuck do you know that? Who knows? Also, it promotes an unfair process, inappropriately favoring the accused and letting schools ignore their responsibility under Title IX to respond promptly and fairly to complaints of sexual violence. We will continue to support survivors. One could argue that these students who have been falsely accused of sexual misconduct are also survivors, but it's highly unlikely that the ACLU will support those students. They're not advocating for those people. Those are just the guys that got away with it.
I think part of the reason that the ACLU opposes this has nothing to do with due process or their opinion on survivors or their opinion on accusers or anything like that. It's because the Trump administration's education secretary is the one who proposed these rules. Not any other reason, but because of who proposed them. And if an Obama era secretary had done the same thing, they would not have been this harsh and probably would not have made this statement. That's the first thing. The second thing is it is talking point soup. The first bit, they start out with the idea that it makes people unsafe if falsely accused students aren't going to be convicted. So the claim here essentially is if you don't punish the innocent, then you are hurting the victims of the guilty, right?
Yep.
The victims of the guilty, just for the record, having been a victim of the guilty multiple times, do not want the innocent punished, right? That's not something that is being asked for by people who have experience. Like, I don't want some random person rounded up. And it would be a person of either sex in my case, right? I don't want a random person rounded up and punished if I can't, get justice. If I can't get not repercussions, but revenge against the people who have harmed me. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't prevent anyone from doing anything to anyone other than, getting an education. Somebody that hasn't committed a sex crime or hasn't committed sexual misconduct and isn't going to, their behavior trajectory isn't changed for the better by subjecting them to something like this. So the idea that it protects survivors of sexual assault to target the innocent for punishment is just it's bullshit. There's no reason to even say that unless you don't believe in innocence. And then the other end, the alarmingly high rate of campus sexual assaults and harassment that go unreported, that claim is based on a long discredited study that, well, a couple of long discredited studies that are still getting cited by feminists as evidence of human behavior. One of them was the cost study that I refer to all the time, where 73%, I think it was, of her respondents disagreed with her assessment of their experiences. 73% of her respondents that she labeled victims disagreed with her assessment of their experiences. And something like 42% of that set of respondents, of the respondents total that she had labeled victims, actually went on to have sex with their alleged rapists again. So her survey method and her assessment methods were so bad that she was labeling people victims of their own choices in relationships that were long-term and sustained. And they're turning around and they've used that method, that research method now for, oh gosh, since like 87 or 88 or something like that. That's been used since the 80s. So basically for about 30 years. And for about 30 years, they have been going with this false story that if feminists are able to falsely label women's experiences sexual victimization, regardless of how the women themselves view those experiences, then rape becomes pervasive and tolerated and common in society, and so does sexual harassment. So that's where that comes from. The other one is a study, and I can never remember the guy's name that did the study, but he asked adult men that were not college students a bunch of questions that were
is that the
exactly...
is that the one, like, 1/3 of all men would rape a woman if they knew they could get away with it? Is it that study?
No, actually, his study found that that he basically said there was an epidemic of serial rape on college campuses. His study found that among his respondents, the majority of sexual violence was committed by like 4 to 6% of his respondents, and they were criminally violent in general. And so that was... Now, what was invalidated about that study was that it applied uniquely to college campuses and indicated an epidemic of serial rape. What it actually showed, the conclusions that he drew from that and that were publicized from that were bull. But what it actually showed, and this was backed by other research as well. I think it was I can't remember which branch of the military. There's a branch of the military that did a similar study, and they found theirs hit 13%, I believe. But in any case, it was still a low percentage of men, and it was... Other studies have found the same thing with respect to women, that sexual violence isn't really dramatically different from other forms of criminal violence, in that the same groups of people commit both. And generally speaking, people who commit violent crimes commit more than one, and they tend to be a minority of the population. And that's correct. But what they did was they translated this into this false epidemic of sexual violence on university campuses, and it's not there. The numbers that come out of university campuses in terms of complaints don't even back the idea that there's unreported assaults in that level. That you would have to say that 99% of assaults go unreported, and I don't believe for a minute that out of all of the bad things that can happen to you, you just keep it to yourself when somebody mistreats you on the basis of sex or to get sex. And then the last thing is they keep using the word survivors. They're talking about this as if all accusers have experienced sexual violence. All sexual violence accusers have experienced sexual violence. Well, that's not true. There are people, they're both sexes, but mostly women, who make sexual violence accusations, who make harassment accusations that are lying. And it's been proved over and over again on university campuses. There are over 300 cases in.
Hello? Hannah?
Oh, we lost her.
Did we lose her? Okay, she'll be back. Oh, there she is. Hannah?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. You dropped out.
Okay, all I did was minimize the screen. But there are over 300 cases. 300 of students who have had to sue because their due process rights were violated, and many of those involve false accusations. Some of them involve disputes. Some of them are he said, she said, where the accusation isn't a lie, but the accuser may be wrongly interpreting the situation or the intent of the accused. But there are blatantly false accusations, and there are some that have made mainstream news that are just egregious. And yeah, so this idea of just calling accusers survivors is also bullshit. And I hate to say it, but it's deeply offensive. It's like basically saying a liar and a person who's been through a traumatic experience are equal in the eyes of the ACLU in terms of being deserving of sympathy and their experiences recognized as a reason to make the accusation that they've made and something that they deserve recourse for. So essentially, treating all accusers equally, treating false accusers as if their accusations are as valid and important as those of actual victims of sexual misconduct is the same as saying that being sexually victimized isn't any worse than just being angry at somebody and wanting to inflict or trying to inflict this on them to get out of a responsibility in class, which has also happened. It's really degrading.
It is. And that was a nice hot take there, ACLU. I hope everyone sees it, because that should tell you everything you need to know about them. So maybe they just outed themselves as fucking ideological tripe as they always have been.
Anti-conservatives.
Yeah. Anti-male. Just like, it's bullshit. So, all right. So we're going to move on to the next story, but I got some super chats. And so we should get through those. So Miles Kinslow gave us $20. Thank you, Miles. Very, very nice of you. And says, the one thing I can appreciate in the Trump era is that it has separated the people with principles from those without. The ACLU is a disgrace. Their reputation is shot. Yeah, it's actually what I was saying. I didn't even read his super chat, but you got it, man. That you nailed it. That was exactly what I was just saying, but you said it better than I did. Ciara de Flora gives us $5 and says, with the amount of false accusations on college grounds, men could feel less safe on campus than women now, for sure. They probably do. They're probably really worried if they've been paying attention to all this stuff, So I would say, yeah, you probably have a point there. And I want to go back to Miles' thing real quick before I move on to the next story. I think that's one of the reasons why we see, because I mean, it's not that Trump is doing this, but it's just because there seems to be people involved in the process that actually want to see some change, and they're identifying problems. Whatever you feel about the president and the administration aside, let's look at things objectively. Betsy DeVos has identified a problem in college campuses, specifically with Title IX and the Dear Colleague letter, and wants to undo it. The damage that this has done is real. This isn't this is not an opinion on this. This is an objectively real thing that's happening that she's trying to fix. The reaction to it is telling everyone everything you need to know about how much of a problem this is. That's it. It's not, you don't have to like the administration, but this is what's happening, and this should tell you. There are people who don't like, they don't want their, I guess whatever they have brewing, their plans to be exposed to be shown for what it is. Now, I don't want to speak to what, you know, people who are proponents of Title IX ultimately want, because it's probably anywhere from just controlling men to protecting women and not knowing the best way to do either of those things. But
it may be as simple as protecting their own jobs.
Yeah, or just protecting their own jobs, for sure. But I mean, I just have to say that I am grateful for that this is happening. At the very least, we're seeing what people are really like. We're seeing their true selves, right? The truth is coming out. And I hope that more people can see it. And at least people who care.
Actually, speaking to that, I got one more thing to say.
Okay.
I know I said a lot, but Betsy DeVos has been the target of a harassment campaign by feminists over this. Like, to the degree that they have engaged in sexual harassment against her. They threw used tampons at her. Like, that's actually a biological weapon. Given that statistically, not factually, but statistically, half the population is infected with STDs, you don't want somebody's bodily fluids coming at you, right? So this woman is basically going through the gauntlet of angry SJWs because of this. It would be really nice if she could hear from some people who are very grateful for her standing up for due process rights, and just, you know, get some emails or letters or whatever out to Betsy DeVos to let her know that a lot of the public stands behind her and is grateful that she is championing a civil right that is vital to our freedom, because she's paying for it.
Yeah, fair enough, for sure. So, okay, so we're going to move on to the next story unless Mike J has any final thoughts. Because I know you didn't say much to this one, or...
My general thoughts on this is a step in the right direction. I really don't have much else to say on this. I'm not super knowledgeable in this field, but, I mean, from all the points laid out here, this seems like it's a good thing. Despite what the ACLU may say or even tweet.
Yeah. Although I still think the best case scenario would be for colleges to just handle this with, you know, like, if you're talking about rape accusations, okay? If you're talking about criminal action, this should be taken to the police. But this is a step in the right direction. But that's how I think it should be handled. I think that goes back to what Hannah was talking about. It's people protecting their jobs. And it's also the college or the university looking out for its own interests and looking out for its own reputation, right? Because if it comes out that there's rape going on the campus, then the university could lose money because they might have a reduced amount of enrollment, which means they get fewer kids spending like $80,000 to go to their fucking school. So,
Isn't that what happened at Evergreen?
Yeah, Evergreen saw a serious dip in enrollment, and also I think Mizzou saw a severe drop too after all their
because nobody wants to go to a school where these racist attacks against black people and minorities just keep happening and happening and happening.
Yeah, or they don't want to deal with like the kind of people that literally throw tantrums because of Halloween costumes. So, all right, well, okay, moving on to the next story. Speaking of sexual assault, the Rotherham gang, the Rotherham sex gang, some members have been jailed. So 6 members of a Middle Eastern gang that were sexually exploiting vulnerable young girls in Rotherham have been sentenced to 101 years. There goes that weird magical number. It's like, who was the judge? Rumpelstiltskin? You are now sentenced to 101 years in prison. Mohammed Imran Ali Akhtar, obviously an Asian man, Asif Ali, Tanwir Ali, Salah Ahmed El Hakam, Nabil Khurshid, Ikhlaq Yusuf, all of them, and a 7th unnamed man, whose name is probably nothing like those.
A Middle Eastern demon.
Yes. This is like Evil Dead 2. Like the thing in the forest is coming towards the Howard.
No. There are no Middle Eastern demons. That's Islamophobia or something.
Oh,
like
yeah,
that.
yeah, you're right. Also, a seventh unnamed man has also been convicted and is awaiting sentence. From the Metro, so this is a quote from the Metro. The case is the first major prosecution arising out of Operation Stovewood, the National Crime Agency's inquiry into historical child sexual exploitation in the South Yorkshire town, which has identified more than 1,500 victims. The gang were found guilty last month of raping and sexually assaulting 5 girls in Rotherham between 1998 and 2005. Many victims were between the ages of 13 and 15 at the time and were plied with drugs and alcohol until they couldn't remember what was going on. In some instances, they were threatened with violence or being abandoned in unknown locations if they did not comply with sexual demands. Again, according to Metro, quote, there are currently 22 separate investigations under the Stovewood umbrella, with 153 suspects identified and 300 complainants engaging with officers. A total of 24 suspects have been charged and 15 have been arrested and bailed or released under investigation. Okay. So I will, again, let you guys have first crack. Anything you want to say about the story? No, nothing?
Seems like
Mike, you go first.
This has been a long time coming. I mean,
yep.
That's kind of all I've got to say on it. I mean, it sounds like they've went through the process. They've kind of decided they know what's happening, and if this is truly what happened, then yeah, justice needs to be served.
Yeah. So a quick clarification. I said 101 years. It's actually a combined 101. Most of them got like 10 or 15 or something, and it adds up to 101. So not that they're not all going to jail. No. I don't think with child rape, I don't think you can have that high of a sentence in the UK. Although, you know, putting a scratch in a girl's chest could get you 99 years. But yeah. So anyway, just to clarify that they're only getting between 10 and 15.
Yeah.
One thing I go ahead, Hannah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, you go. You go ahead. I thought you were done. Sorry.
Oh, okay. No, I was gonna let you guys go first, but I just want to. I'm not gonna say too much on it, but there is one thing I do want to say. So, presuming, and I think it's safe to assume that these are, you know, that this has been going on a long time. It's likely. I mean, I have to have some faith in the legal system that they're doing this the right way, and these guys are likely guilty, and the convictions are, you know, not just sort of thrown out there because it's been going on for so long, and this has been such a big problem, and everyone's been talking about it. So it seems fair to say that they're likely guilty, and that this is, you know, justice being served appropriately. But that being said, this is the reason why due process is very important, because the guilty should go to jail for the crime that they actually commit. Now, I think that, oddly enough, the UK government waited way too long to actually start doing something about this problem. But when you try to conflate real crimes like this with the stuff where people are just making accusations, right? It's harder to actually get the real criminals. This is another thing that has to be pointed out. When you're just responding to every false accusation, it's like the boy who cried wolf scenario. Then it becomes more difficult to actually convict real criminals because it's more difficult for people get worn out from all of the accusations, and you can't actually, like, you have a harder time getting the real criminals that are actually committing crimes. So, you know, I'm glad that this happened, but it's important to know the difference between when some crazy chick that some guy unfortunately put his penis in decides to cut herself. You know, I mean, weird flex, but okay. And then, like, on the other side, where there are, you know, a gang of men that are foreign that are just raping people. And I don't think it's just girls. I think there were boys, too, but for some reason the article doesn't mention that.
None of the articles mention boys, no. Except for a very small few.
Yeah.
It's like they don't care, you know. Well, obviously.
Well, if you're going to tug on the heartstrings, you know, it's pretty normal.
They don't care. And especially the ones that are trying to say that because these guys did this, anybody who is a practicing Muslim is a sexual violence threat, they're really emphasizing the girls.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing that I wanted to emphasize on this, besides that, obviously, you look at this. Okay, so there's 22 separate investigations under the Stovewood umbrella, according to this, according to the Metro, right? 153 suspects identified, 300 complainants engaging with officers, 24 have been charged, 15 have been arrested and bailed or released under investigation. And what do we have here? We have 1, 2, 3, 4,
6,
5, 6 guys. So six
men
of the 15 that have now been convicted and sentenced. Which means that even in this investigation, the discussion of this has gone on for a long time. It's been public knowledge for a long time. There was a lot of outrage over this in the beginning because initially accusers were getting actually targeted by law enforcement for making the accusations. They were being penalized for making the accusations rather than investigating this. The UK, the law enforcement in the UK was actually treating it as hate crimes to make these accusations, if I remember right. And but even in this situation, 300 complainants, some of them are going to be most of them, maybe telling the truth. We don't know, but at least some of them are going to be telling the truth, and at least some of them are going to be lying. Some of them are going to be latching onto this case. Oh yeah, I was one of the Rotherham girls. Yeah. Pity me, or have sympathy for me, or whatever. It doesn't mean that anyone in particular is doing that, and it doesn't mean that anyone in particular should be presumed to be doing that. But that is likely happening in conjunction with this, and they have to be really careful to ensure that when they investigate this, they separate out the liars from the ones telling the truth, the men that have been falsely accused from the men whose accusations are true, and so on. And I want to compare this to the Mark Pearson case and some of the cases that we've seen at ICMI's different years, where they've discussed UK police bending over backwards to get a conviction against a white guy or a black guy who was born and raised in London or born and raised in the UK. That where they've withheld exculpatory information, falsified evidence, falsely edited a video by slowing it down to make it look like Pearson had much longer to do what he was accused of doing than he actually had. And here they treated this like a hate crime against Muslims, this accusation mass as a hate crime against Muslims for the longest time before they actually deigned to investigate and find out if there was any criminal activity behind it. And, for me, I do not subscribe to the idea that just because there is a characteristic in common that isn't in and of itself sexual violence. So 2 people are the same race, 2 people are the same religion, 2 people are from the same area, 2 people are even in the same gang. That means that they both committed the same crime. I don't like the idea of saying, well, if these Muslims did it, all Muslims are going to do it. That's not my position on this.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very clear that there is a bias against accountability for certain groups in the UK and in the European Union. And when you exempt a group from accountability, the unscrupulous within that group are going to know it. And you are endangering everybody that has to deal with that group, because as long as the unscrupulous, the immoral or amoral within that group know that being a part of that group makes them exempt from accountability when they do bad things, they're going to do more bad things. So it doesn't matter that it's not all Muslims. It doesn't matter that it's not all refugees, and of course that not all refugees are actually refugees. What matters is when those who engage in criminal acts are demonstrated to have engaged in criminal acts, are they individually accountable for their actions? And that really is what needs to be the focus. It shouldn't have anything to do with either their accountability or their lack of accountability. It shouldn't have anything to do with who they are. It should have to do with what they did or did not do, and what can be proved, what can be documented, and what can be done about it. And if that is the focus, no matter what people tell you about your attitude toward Muslims, or about being an Islam apologist for not translating it to all Muslims, you are in the right.
Yeah.
That's the focus that needs to happen. Accountability for actions.
Indeed. Okay. Mike J, you already said what you wanted to say. I got some super chats, and then I guess we go on to the last story. So let's see. I think we got one more, right? Catherine Scully. Hello, Catherine. Gives us $5 Canadian, and she, I'm presuming her pronouns here, says, "Do you think these guys might get whacked in prison?" Well, it depends. I think honestly that there's a lot of Muslims in prison, and I think that these guys might be okay. Actually, it depends on the prison they sent them to. Like, remember, they sent Tommy Robinson to, I think it was a maximum security prison that had the highest or one of the highest Muslim populations in it. And people were afraid that it was on purpose to like make sure he dies in there. Of course, he didn't, and he made it. But if the claim is true that there are prisons that have really high Muslim populations in them, then maybe these guys will be okay in there because there's likely a criminal element in them as well. But it's hard to say. I don't know because I'm not from the UK, so it's, speculative. And also, I mean, they're going to prison for a crime. I don't really want them to get killed. Like, I think that's taking it to another level. It's like, if a man goes to prison in the United States, so I can just change the context to here. And I don't want to get too, this is a tangent, I know, but I'm just going to, be brief on it. If a man goes to prison for a crime, then the prison sentence should be the punishment. Anything else that happens to him while he's in prison is additional consequences that should not be considered part of said punishment. So, people often joke about sending a rapist to prison to get raped. Well, that's not why we send them to prison. We send them to prison to be imprisoned, to essentially, it's like a temporary exile from civilization. They're not with the rest of us. They don't get to see the people they love. They don't get to work a job or earn money. All they do is they live in prison now for whatever their sentence is. That is the punishment. Anything else that happens to them, if they're beaten or stabbed or shivved or raped in prison, that's extra stuff. That's stuff that shouldn't be happening in prison, basically. But I think we take a pretty laissez-faire approach to thinking of prison as everything that happens in there is part of the punishment. And I don't agree with that, because there are people that are falsely accused that spend prison time and stuff happens to them in prison. And this is not, and the problem with that also is, when those things happen to people in prison, it only increases their likelihood of living a lifestyle that will bring them back to prison. It will essentially make them part of the revolving door of prison, basically, where they just keep on going back in because they can't get a regular job, they can't find a regular life. They probably have all manner of other sort of issues that come out. I mean, I would imagine that if you were a straight man and you went to prison and you got ass raped, or even if you're a gay man and you went to prison and you got ass raped because you didn't want to sleep with these men, it's gonna fuck with you. You're not gonna be well when you get out. And so these are consequences of going to prison that I don't think should be normalized. So, in my opinion, in my opinion, I don't think it's likely that they're going to get whacked in there because they probably have friends in there because they're a gang and they probably have connections with people that help them, find these victims. But in addition, I wouldn't really want that because I think that they have to serve the time for the crime, and that's it. Like, everything else is just additional. That's my opinion. So, and I'm not wagging my finger at anyone for making that comment. So don't think that I'm trying to like grandstand or whatever. I think about that stuff myself, like where people don't consider that going to prison is not just going into a box where you're sort of like sealed away from everyone else. It comes with a bunch of other shit, and I wish it didn't, because that actually is one of the problems, is that we already have a lower amount of empathy for men who in general, but then when they're men that are criminal, it's even lower, and if those men go to prison, it's almost non-existent. If even it's the opposite, like we want bad things to happen to them on top of them going to prison. And so that's what I think about that. So that's all.
Something else to point out, I've looked at the prison system just obviously entirely from outside the profession, outside the experience, outside everything. Just looking at various documentaries, various writing and everything. And it doesn't seem like a very functional thing in general, the entire thing. There's been advocacy just for women that I think should be extended to men to make criminal justice penalties that involve imprisonment more like essentially being temporarily committed to a mental health institution. And honestly, criminal dysfunction is a mental health issue, in my opinion. And part of the reason why I say this is that the evidence that comes from the fact that if you look in the histories of rapists who are adults, many of them, the majority of them, were sexually victimized as children by the sex that they end up raping as adults. And this is true whether they go after other adults or whether they go after children. And there's other factors, obviously, because there are those who have been victimized who don't grow up to be sexually violent. But if you look at the histories of people who are criminally violent in general, more often than not, they grew up in violent environments where they may have been neglected in terms of any kind of mentorship from an adult. They grew up in poor environments. A lot of people who have engaged in criminal violence in the course of committing crimes that were nonviolent crimes that spiraled out of control, or were attacked themselves, like in terms of gang violence. So you're seeing a whole dysfunction that has social causes, that has that's more nurture than nature. That there is a situation where rehabilitation isn't going to happen from sitting in a box in a building full of other people that also commit violent crime, and it's not really functional to just say, well, here's your punishment, and not do things to help the individuals change their behavior pattern. And it's not functional actually to do the things to them that led to that behavior pattern, that contributed to the development of that behavior pattern in the first place as part of their punishment. And it just, I think if feminists are right about changes that should be made in the women's prison system, those changes should be looked at for the men's prison system as well. Obviously, I've said before, dramatically changing drug laws, eliminating them altogether would be great. But that would make a significant difference, because people wouldn't be stuck in that system for nonviolent crimes that are basically violating the government's entitlement to control what you ingest. But the idea that we just treat people who at the end of a long path, like they started out at that point on the path and they have just been that bad all their lives, and there's nothing else that contributed to their behavior except the character that they have, because that's just the way they were born. That's really not going to solve any of the criminal problems that we have in society, and
Right.
I think it's abuse.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we could do a whole thing just about the prison systems. Maybe Hannah's already done one on HBR Talk, but we'll have to save
We've
that
talked
for
about
another
it
time.
somewhat.
Yeah. So you guys should check out those videos, HBR Talk. I knew that she did some. So, okay, so let's see. I got another super chat here. CR de Flor gives us $5 and says, there is a podcast called Wrongful Convictions. It's pretty good. It says it's pretty goo, but I think she means good. It's pretty goo. They talk with people from the Freedom Project, I think it's called. Yes, I think it's called the Freedom Project. You're talking about the people who, they use the DNA testing to sort of like get guys off of prison sentences, because now we have the DNA testing to prove whether or not these guys have raped a woman or whatever, and they get them early release or prevent them from going to jail. So I believe it's called the Freedom Project. There was some of that in Cassie J's Red Pill movie. But we're going to go ahead and get on to the last story. And it looks like we're going to be finishing a little after 6:30 today, which is fine. But even though I only had 4 stories, we still went a little bit long, because I knew that the Title IX thing was going to be a bit long. But here we're going to end on something kind of funny. So, Mike J, if you're available, let's talk about the word of the year.
Oh boy, Oxford's word of the year. I actually found in the course there are a lot of different publications that put out a word or list of words of the year. But Oxford is the one that's really been ramping it up in the past couple of years with that "how do you do, fellow youths" factor. So every year the Oxford English Dictionary decides on a word of the year. This word is selected, quote, to reflect the ethos, mood, or preoccupations of the passing year, and have lasting potential as a term of cultural significance.
Ugh.
Previous words to claim this prestigious title have been vape, selfie, and U+1F602, which is Unicode, which is better known as the face with tears of joy emoji.
Is that what they call it? I thought it was like the cry laugh emoji.
If you type that Unicode string into Google, it comes out as face with tears of joy emoji.
Oh, okay.
So, what has the honor of joining the ranks of these highly important and culturally significant words? That word would be toxic. Not toxic as in chemically, though toxic as in relating to relationships, communities, and of course, and especially, masculinity.
Masculinity,
Am I right?
T. Of course.
Echo brackets. So yeah, a 45% spike in the number of times toxic has been looked up in a non-chemical sense has been reported by Oxford in the past year. And what competition has toxic had? What did that have to do to become word of the year? So toxic has beaten out the other words such as gaslighting, incel.
Ooh, but only by a little bit, right? I mean, the year's not over. Incel could, it could come,
and make a
could
comeback. All we need is a few
yeah.
more shootings.
Yes, that's right.
Orbiting, which I guess has linked to the term ghosting, which
Really?
is orbiting. It's like guess
I thought-
orbiting is like ghosting somebody, but like still following their social media and stuff to see what's going on with them.
Oh, I always thought of orbiting as something that Chads would describe betas as doing to Stacy's.
Oh no. Yeah,
So
that's what I thought
orbiters.
too. Beta orbiters.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, I would have thought of it as a harassment term, just thinking of what feminists would accuse people of. Oh, this guy's been orbiting me for months. He's Stalking.
Well, I mean, when you have your own gravitational pull, I mean, you do create some orbits around yourself, so.
But the most
What
important...
you get for sitting around the house by really sitting around the house.
The most important word that Toxic beat out.
Pun intended.
Deep breath. Sigh. Big Dick Energy. Or BDE for short.
Oh man, somebody stole my band name.
Big Dick Energy. So not Dragon Energy. That didn't even get him that. Oh, Kanye slipping. But Big Dick Energy. I love it.
Which was made famous in a tweet by Twitter user @BabyVietCong, who was talking about Ariana Grande and her then fiance Pete Davidson, describing him as Pete Davidson is 6'3" with dark circles, exudes big dick energy, looks evil but is apparently an angel, and loves his girl publicly.
That's funny.
The gaslighting thing is funny too, because toxic masculinity is the toxic masculinity narrative is essentially feminists gaslighting men. On one hand, they say that men's stoicism, men's being expected to be stoic about everything is toxic masculinity. But then every reaction that you have to anything, your emotions are invalid if your main interest in the particular condition or whatever that you're responding to is not women's interest. You know, if your primary interest is yourself and your welfare, which everybody should have as their primary interest most of the time, then your feelings are invalid. So you should be stoic about that, you know, and only emote when it's in women's interests, right? So they're gaslighting men right there, and especially anger. You're not allowed to be angry, right? You're supposed to express your emotions, but not that one. Not that one. You know, not even if it's legitimate, not even if you've been abused, not even if you're angry because somebody just hurt you right now, then well, that's toxic.
Well, yeah, feminists want men to to express their emotions, but on their terms and the way that they want, and it has to be if there's any negative emotions, they should be done in a way that makes women feel safe, because women still take priority. And on top of that, if there's anything that's negative, it also cannot be directed at women or especially at feminists. So it has to be, you have to direct your negative emotions at men. And if you can, maybe just like, you know, be vocal about it, but direct it inwards so that you just blame yourself and beat yourself up over it, and men in general, but don't do it to women, and especially don't do it to feminists. And make sure that when women and feminists feel safe while you're being negative. There, and now you can go ahead and do it, man. You can go ahead and express your emotions. I give you permission to be human under those conditions. That's where the toxic masculinity discussion comes from. And I think, or, you know, and it's not new. Like, I mean, we've been using toxic masculinity as a phrase. It's kind of like a newer phrase. This is why this is probably made the Oxford's 2018 word of the year. But the concept of the idea of toxic masculinity is far older, because I know I've seen it use the same kind of idea. It was talked about in the 60s, 70s, and 80s with feminists. You can find that. You know, like all of the prominent feminists that claim to care about men, that's where they go with it. And it's important to distinguish this, because, you know, I want men to be able to talk freely about their feelings. We're for that. Like, we understand that there are pressures for men not to express themselves, right? But there's a difference, because we know that some of where that comes from is women. So, and that's the thing that feminists don't say, right? And we also understand that the way that men express themselves is not the way that women do. So there is an understanding that men are not that hamstringed, but there are some that do. And I think, actually, ironically, from what I've seen, a lot of it is either men that are like that are very, very conservative, like where there's like a sort of and then I'm talking about like sort of an extreme case in a way, or at least like a high level of conservatism that it asks men to be stoic in the face of, as much as they can bear, which can be bad because they need a release, and if they don't have other men to like do things with to get that release, it can be bad for them. But where it really is common that I've seen is feminist men that are in no way allowed to even though feminists say men can express their feelings and like open up and embrace their feminine side and all that, a lot of times feminist men are the ones that end up losing it because they actually aren't free, because feminists will say, well, cry me a river with your male tears or whatever, and so they don't actually have that much sympathy for them. And that the ironic thing is that they're the ones asking that men like stop being toxic, but they really don't want that. They don't want men to speak up. They don't want men to talk. They want them to shut up, especially if what they have to say isn't convenient or they don't find it to be nice.
No, yeah, they wanna say that they allow men. Like, men have their permission, right? They want to say that men are allowed to express their emotions. Not that it's just that it's healthy, but that they have feminist permission, as long as it's the appropriate ones. They want control over not just what men feel, are allowed to say they feel, but what they feel themselves. And the whole toxic masculinity narrative. There's two branches of it. All right, there was the mythopoetic men's movement. Was all about broadening the restrictions, I guess you could say, on social attitudes that impose restrictions on men's behavior. So essentially, the idea that just because we view the lumberjack type, right, as manly, does not mean that we cannot also view the poet with the emo haircut as also manly. And that idea was, these things can both exist within masculinity simultaneously, both be masculine, both be acceptable, as long as they both are a part of a functional accountable adult who isn't experiencing problems in his life due to dysfunctional behavior on the basis of all that, right? So he can be rugged as long as he's not hurting himself to be rugged, and he can be emotional as long as he's not undercutting his success in life by being overly emotional, and at least not to the point where it damages his ability to survive financially. And so Chris Reason says masculine poet. Hannah, please. I'm sorry, but the best poets are men.
Oh yeah, the best musicians, poets, artists.
Right. Even though we hear that women are the best communicators, that women have the best grasp on the English language. No, women are best at communicating some things, but the best poets are men. And I'm sorry, but it's true. Women can pull your heartstrings, but men can take you into the depths of your imagination.
No, it's true. But men are like men are they're the top writers, they're the top chefs, they're the top artists, they're the top sculptors, top comedians, musicians. Not that there aren't women that do those things and aren't really good at them, but they're dominant. Like when it comes to like just meritocracy, those things are dominated by men. So it's like Eric Clapton, that's a man, and he's also a great musician. So
yes. So the mythopoetic men's movement's use of the term wasn't demonizing. It's the whole idea was to do what feminists say they're trying to do with it. But feminists use the term toxic masculinity to beat men over the head. And their trajectory versus the mythopoetic, their branch of the use of the term, that traces back to Raelyn Connell, who is a trans woman, who her experience of masculinity is being trapped in it for all of her childhood and a significant portion of her adult life, including the portion during which she wrote her work on toxic masculinity during a time of being biologically male. It was published under the name Robert initially, and as much as, being trans doesn't invalidate you as a person, it doesn't invalidate all of your opinions on gender issues or anything, but it's very difficult to say that gender dysphoria didn't affect this at all. In fact, I would think that gender dysphoria can be considered an unhealthy experience of masculinity. That is why trans women and trans men transition, because gender dysphoria is unhealthy, and it can lead to suicide if there isn't a treatment for it.
42%.
So the idea that a person's writings on the nature of masculinity and what is or is not toxic within masculinity, coming from that experience of gender dysphoria, translate to other men who are not experiencing gender dysphoria, whose masculinity is not a prison in which they are trapped, but the life that they live. I don't think it applies. And I wouldn't want somebody who became a trans man to turn around and tell me all the things that are toxic about being female, and apply his gender dysphoria to my experience of being female. And I don't think it's fair for feminists to apply Rayo and Connell's experience of gender dysphoria to cis men's experience of being male either. And in particular, when I looked into this, one of the things that I noticed was a significant amount of what Rayo and Connell wrote about being male and about toxic masculinity mirrors Andrea Dworkin and her man-hating, basically bullshit, her accusations against men. And again, this sounds to me very much like an individual who listened to a crazy person and added, her own experience of being trapped unwillingly inside masculinity, and decided that this is what's wrong with all men everywhere.
Yeah.
And so I consider the entire feminist toxic masculinity narrative invalid on that basis.
Absolutely. And it's like so there's a lot of feminist talking points, a lot of issues that they bring up that are like circulating in our, lexicon. That's mostly been adapted and agreed with by the average person, people that are in the Matrix. And of all of them, toxic masculinity is the one that I hate the most, easily. It's my least. It's just like, I hate them all because they're all like, lies, exaggeration, they're woozles, they're all bullshit used to manipulate people. But toxic masculinity is the one that I despise the most. It's the one that just really gets under my skin. And so just the word of the year being toxic in the context of behaviors as well as masculinity, which is probably like the biggest one. It doesn't surprise me because I've been hearing about it a lot. In fact, I think what I was thinking is that this toxic masculinity narrative, this term, it's basically made it into the mainstream entertainment media. I remember a video of Trevor Noah on The Daily Show, and he had on what's his name, Terry Crews, right? And I liked Terry Crews, and I'm not really sure now, but I used to. One of the things I liked about him was that he defended fathers on Father's. I think there was a Father's Day episode of The View or something, and he was on there. The View or The Talk, I don't know, whatever. I don't watch those shows. And he defended the need for a father in the family. And I was in 100%, 110% agreement with him on that point. But then he went on The Daily Show recently. This was after the Me Too thing came out. And of course, he's got like films he's going to be in and stuff. I'm not saying there's a relationship between him towing the line of this narrative and getting a lot of work in Hollywood, but take it for what it is. But he went on there and essentially supported the toxic masculinity narrative on The Daily Show. And Trevor Noah brings it up. They talk about it for about 6 minutes or so, and that becomes the basis of everything. And it's all about, he was just projecting all this shit out there, and basically it became a finger wag at all men that were watching the program and all the women in the audience. And that has carried on. It was going on before, it was building up. The Me Too movement started this conversation. And I put that in quotes when I say it, because it's not really a conversation so much as it's a diatribe. And then it's moved on to where basically, like with Kavanaugh and Trump and anybody they don't like, and incels, and video games and Red Dead Redemption 2 and whatever they want to use, toxic masculinity has become, it's a mainstream topic now. It's a mainstream thing. And so I mean, toxic masculinity, my least favorite thing, and I remember it coming up on The Daily Show, and I wonder if that's not the reason why it's become the word of the year, because it's basically being used in the mainstream, and everyone's like, well, what does this mean? And they go and look it up. So just wanted to put that out there.
It almost sounds like these people didn't get out of junior high school. I mean, the stuff that they have said are expectations that are consistently and widespreadly, are widely applied to men, imposed on men, are the kind of things that junior high boys sort of, they don't necessarily, I wouldn't say they necessarily think that's what everybody expects of them, but it's sort of their gig when they're 13 years old. It's their way of acting out. Right, and their way of posturing and puffing themselves up, and they hear from everybody that it's wrong. They hear from the adults around them. They hear from the gals around them. They hear from the more mature guys around them that are not adults yet. That's don't do that shit. That's stupid. And they grow out of it. Most of them grow out of it. But these social justice types seem to apply the 13-year-old boy mentality to masculinity in general and call it the norm, as if all of society isn't geared to opposing it. Even, they'll tell you that Hollywood portrays this type of behavior as the norm, but when you actually watch the stuff that they're pointing at, it's portrayed as actions that have consequences and that make the character less likable, and it's like I said, I really think that they never get out of the junior high mentality, don't mature past the age of 13, 14 years old.
Well, when you consider how bad the education system is and how basically people are learning everything from bullshit that the education system's academia is run by feminists, right? Even if you're not in the humanities. That's why this thing with the Title IX stuff, it's like it's a step in the right direction, but when everyone there is a feminist, basically, it's probably not going to be that positive. Then you have that everyone in the media, or at least the majority of people in the media that's in the news as well as in the entertainment industry itself, is feminist as well. And so they're just going to regurgitate the same talking points. And it's likely because they believe it. And so it goes from their mouths into other people's heads. And then regular folks who, if you ask them if they were feminist, they'd probably say no, because they think of it as some kind of job. But they believe in those ideas because that's what they've been fed, like from the beginning, from schools and from the television and from the internet and from their teachers and professors and their superiors at their jobs and the people in HR or whatever. Then, that's like, it doesn't matter if we call it feminism or not, because it's just what people believe. And toxic masculinity is just one of those things that they just believe. And now we have to unravel that. And that's going to be tough, because just like everything else, everyone just takes it as gospel. And men will go along with it too. They'll say, "Oh yeah, sure, you know, they do already. They're just like, yeah, we're violent. You know, we could probably like spend some time getting in touch with our feminine side. You know, it's I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't want to get too negative here, but it's going to be an uphill climb, and it's getting worse, is all I can say.
Well, and I think part of it is people are always looking for external reasons instead of internal reasons for their own dysfunction.
Yeah.
And men are always looking for solutions. So when you combine toxic masculinity, sort of combines that. It's an external reason for your dysfunction, and it offers a tangible potential solution, and at least one that looks like a tangible potential solution to the problem that they've been told that they have or that they are. So there's a certain segment that's gonna latch onto it if they don't have the knowledge, or they are unable to sort of logic their way through. Hey, this doesn't totally sound right, or if they've experienced. Especially if they've experienced, growing up in a dysfunctional environment or something like that, if they didn't have male mentors in their lives, things like that, they're going to buy it. They're going to buy it hook, line, and sinker, and they're going to be all in, and they're going to try to sell it to other men because it's basically their snake oil, and that once they've bought it. Then they can't be wrong about it, because if they're wrong about it, then they still have the problem, right, that they've been told that they have. You still have the epizootic. You still need the snake oil. And so, that's the pattern. And I'm seeing that with male feminists all the time.
Yep. Okay, so with that said, I guess unless there's any final thoughts on this story or anything else, we're going to go ahead and close it out. What do you say, Mike?
Yeah, let's go ahead and chop the sausage here.
Oh yeah, we're gonna chop the sausage here. So we're gonna go into this after show to talk about this article about Red Dead Redemption 2. Again, if you want to be a part of it, you got to become a patron at www.patreon.com/honeybadgerradio. And one level of patronage will let you watch the show, and other levels will let you participate at let's say in more interactive ways with us. In the Discord. So, with that said, we're going to go ahead and get out of here, and I want to thank you guys for joining us on this episode of HBR News, and I want to thank Mike and Hannah for coming on and hanging out with me, and I would especially want to thank you guys for being our subscribers. Without you, well, we'd be talking into the void, and no one would listen. So, leave us a comment, give us a like, and subscribe to the channel. I will talk to you guys later. Have a good night, everybody.